Climate change is disrupting agricultural practices, affecting food security and farmers' livelihoods. Technologies like AI enable precision agriculture emerging as potential solutions to alleviate some of these problems. In Asia, where most farmers are smallholders and a digital divide still persists, what are the implications of AI adoption for agriculture in the region? Can it help address the climate crisis, or is it likely to exacerbate existing inequities? Hello and welcome to Code Green, a podcast series where we explore the intersection of climate change and artificial intelligence in Asia. I'm Urvashi Aneja, the founder and director of Digital Futures Lab. We are an India-based research organization that examines the impact of technology on society in the global south. Through evidence-based research, systematic foresight, and public engagement, we work to realize equitable, safe, and sustainable digital futures for all. This podcast is accompanied by a monthly newsletter where we showcase the latest scientific and socio-technical research at the intersection of AI and climate action. You can access both the podcast and our newsletter at codegreen.asia. This podcast is supported by Earth Venture Foundation, a not-for-profit initiative that supports scientific research to advance climate action. In today's episode of Code Green, we are joined by Anubha Singh and Elnita Danyu to unpack some of the complex narratives of AI and agriculture in Asia, drawing from their experiences in India and the Philippines. Anubha is a PhD candidate at the School of Information, University of Michigan, where she's conducting a long-term ethnography of the onion supply chain in Western Maharashtra, India. Elnita, also known as Net, is the Asia director of the ETC Group and has worked extensively on various issues in agriculture, new technologies, and climate change in Southeast Asia. In this episode, we deep dive into the opportunities, challenges, and risks of using AI for agriculture and how it might impact climate change. For the most part, our speakers are skeptical about the use of AI for agriculture, highlighting that it may not be what farmers need and ultimately serve narrow commercial interests. If we are to use AI for agriculture, we need to resist the fail-fast logic that dominates the startup industry and invest the time and resources to engage with farming communities and understand their needs and social context. Let's jump right into the conversation. Hi, Net. Hi, Anubha. Great to have you both on the show, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Code Green on AI and agriculture and what that means for climate action in the region. Net, so if I could start with you, you've been working in this space for a long time. You have a kind of longer arc view of the agriculture and digitalization space, both in the Philippines as well as in the kind of region more broadly. So, where do you see it currently at? What do you feel is the kind of state of play of AI for agriculture in the region? Are there some key initiatives that stand out for you?
Well, there are a number of initiatives and trends that stand out for me. First is the reinforcement of existing inequalities. That's I think that's a hard one to start with. No, it stands out for me because despite all the promises that digitalization is going to be an equalizer, that this will allow those in the margins to be able to participate and all that, I actually haven't seen any breakthroughs that actually go beyond the old mold, where new technologies tend to reinforce existing inequalities. Those in the margins still don't have the access, can't afford, don't even have the basic na foundational technologies and enabling technologies such as electricity, for example, or even connectivity. No, that to me stands out. Despite the promises, there's also a lot of hope, no, on the part of communities and also civil society organizations working with um, rural communities, that digitalization could offer an opportunity that will go beyond the usual mode where new technologies would tend to reinforce existing inequalities. Second, there's also this massive push by governments on for digitalization in agriculture, despite of and in spite of the existing inequalities that persist in terms of access to the tools, access to the foundational technologies, and enabling infrastructures. Like we observers and researchers might even say that this is not surprising, but I do find it still surprising because it repeats previous historical wrongs in terms of pushing for technologies that are not appropriate, that may not be needed, that also does not have the foundation in terms of capacities and knowledge on the part of those that are targeted. Like in Southeast Asia, currently there's massive promotion by governments of digitalization, not just in agricultural production processes all the way to marketing, but even digitalization of all the information and data pertaining to those in the sector and rural communities. Like you have in the Philippines a system now that requires all farmers to be registered digitally before they can even access basic services in agriculture, such as insurance, agricultural subsidies, among others. So that's number two. Three, like you also I also see a lot of like introduction of sophisticated digital technologies such as drones, sensors, all these apps left and right, to those who are already enabled, no, those who have the means, no? Like big farmers, industrial plantations, and there's also expectations for the small ones to be able to catch up. So there's still this thinking that somehow catching up will allow them to benefit, no, or get some benefits or trickles of benefits coming from digitalization. I think those are the three trends that I see, not just in the Philippines, but also in other parts of Southeast Asia, in particular. And I think East Asia is a different case because you have China there, where most of these digital tools and all these sophisticated tools that are being introduced now in agriculture, to promote digitalization, are actually produced and coming from, of course, countries like Japan, South Korea is another level because like totally different, almost northern context in terms of problems and challenges in agricultural sector. So this is where AI is happening, no? Like and the AI that we are discussing here could be from apps, which is the most prevalent of all the AIs, if you will code that AI. Of course, that's debatable. And of course, all these new AIs could be generative or otherwise that are being touted as the key solutions to problems in the agricultural sector in developing countries in Asia in general. So I think those are the key things that I've noticed. Maybe nothing surprising there, mainly reinforcing what we already know, what we've seen in previous waves of technological so-called revolutions. And to me, that stands out because we never learn despite the failures and sadness of previous technological revolutions that tended to marginalize those who are already in the margins.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ned. Lots to kind of unpack there. And I think one of the big things I'm taking away from what you're saying to maybe, draw a thread around the four points you raised is that we seem to be kind of doing the same things over and over again and not really seeing any very different results. So, we seem to be investing more in technology, but yet the kind of technology that we're building is not helping breaking existing inequalities. Governments seem to be pushing a digitalization agenda and be pushing it kind of at any cost or regardless of whether it's actually delivering on the promise that they expect it to. So, just as a kind of follow up question, like, why do you think that is, right? Why is it that we're investing more and more in technology? There's more money that there's ever been in technology. There's more young people than there has ever been in technology. There's more think tanks like ourselves working in technology, but yet we don't seem to be moving beyond tech that just reinforces those existing inequalities. And like, why do you think that is? And of course, specifically, like if you could contextualize that a little bit to the context of agriculture in your region.
Yeah, that's a tough question, Urvashi, but very, very interesting. And to me, that really gets into the heart of what I was saying earlier, that despite the challenges, despite the failures of previous so-called technological revolutions, we're still seeing the same pattern. And to me, I think there are several ways of answering that. Of course, the easiest one would be to say it's always easy for governments, politicians, and think tanks to say that technology is the solution. And I always get back to that by asking what is the question. No, in the first place, if we're saying that technology is the answer, so what is the question? And like engaging with social movements, even going down to local communities, like just like last week, no, I was in a big gathering of rural women in Davao, no, and there were questions, no, that same questions that you ask in different ways, that were posed to women from indigenous communities and upland women farmers there, and they were actually saying that this is not what we need. Do we even ask those who actually bear the brunt, who are actually bearing the problem, on what is the solution to their own problems? I think that is also a key barrier, like really top down solutions and providing solutions to problems that we don't even ask, no, those who are suffering, on what do they think, how this should be addressed. No, like women were saying that what use would it have for me, the app that the government is promoting when I don't even have a phone. No, I cannot afford to have a phone. Another woman said, I barely understand English. So these apps, like when they show, are all in English or in Filipino, which is not even my language or dialect that we use. And another woman said, we don't even have electricity and much less connection, or they would say they would not have signal. That's what they said. They don't have signal. You have to even walk a kilometer to be able to get a signal or charge your phone. So it's really a mismatch. You have a solution, and the solution to problems will not really address the problem, because it doesn't match. No, that's not the problem that you need to solve. And to me, it repeats because it doesn't, we don't get to admit that's not the way, to address a problem. I think as another key, and this is to me a very fundamental, is looking at technology as something that comes from outside, something that is brought by the PhDs and the big tech and technology guys of this world. No, like really not even recognizing ways, based on indigenous and traditional knowledge as technology, not even labeling them as technology. I think if we keep on doing that, then we will keep on repeating the same problem of bringing in solutions that we think is right for them, because this is the technology that they need and what they're doing is not. So to me, it's really very, very fundamental. It's really the mindset and how we view people who are at the margins, and how we actually look at changes and developments. Like if you will look back from the previous so-called technological revolution, green revolution in particular, from the 60s, 70s, and this is not just Southeast Asia, of course. India is a major experimental ground, as well. And the proponents of that revolution, from the 60s, 70s, would say that their revolution saved people from hunger, saved communities from hunger, and that is the main metrics, like amount of food, amount of grains that are being produced now per hectare. And no one is looking at how much landlessness it has cost, how much marginalization it has caused to those who don't have access to irrigation, who don't have access to modern seeds. And what is the metrics is just so minuscule, so focused on the amount of grains produced per hectare. And then, of course, that is translated to nutrition, etc., especially those who live in in urban areas. But we barely look at those were suffering, who continued to suffer, who continued to be in the margins, because the main expectation is somehow they will catch up. So I think if we look at that formula again and again, we'll probably see, of course, higher productivity but less nutrition, more grains per hectare but less diversity. So and then all these problems that goes with it, no, that goes with it, dependence on external inputs, depletion of resources, and we will see much worse. So I think we'll have to learn from that, like looking beyond. No, this very limited, this very limiting metrics that make us believe that X revolution has succeeded because it has increased productivity, and forget everything else about marginalization, about depletion of resources, erosion of diversity, and all that. So that's a very long response, but because the problem is really deeper than what we stated as a problem of who controls the technology.
Got it. No, thank you for that. And I think that, like you were saying, it's a long response only because the problem is actually very deep and complex, right? And Anubha, maybe I can bring you in here. There's two pieces of what Net was saying that really struck with me. On one hand, it seems like we're not actually listening enough, right? We're kind of imposing solutions top down, and we're not actually asking farmers or people who work in agriculture, like, what do you really need. And so we need more participation. At the same time, something that Net had said in the beginning around hope, right? That a lot of people have a lot of hope that technology will actually deliver, and get them out of their current situation, whether it's in terms of livelihood security or other forms of security. And you've done extensive work at the ground with farming communities in India. What are you hearing? What are the kind of hopes that farmers have from technology, and what is the kind of technological interventions that you are hearing that they would like to see, or you think based on your research they would like to see?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Urvashi. But before answering that, I kind of, what Neth said made me, it just reminded me of this conversation I was having with somebody else a while back, and that agri-tech is a solution which is in search of its problem. So that kind of, I think, really frames the bigger context for me for having this conversation in. And I'm currently doing my PhD, and as you know, I've done 17 months long of ethnography of the onion supply chain in Western Maharashtra. So I've worked with the farmers, with the traders, with, technology incubators, with tech startup companies. And one of the things which I really found, which was very stark, was that even though there was all of this, pressure or push from the top and even from the technology startups to kind of, build new technologies and to have all of these fancy, sophisticated interventions, there was actually no uptake of it on the ground. And this is in Western Maharashtra, which is relatively, how would I say, it is a relatively well-to-do, farming community. We have no issues of internet. We have no issues of, even in remote regions, we have network availability. But there was just this refusal from the farmers who were like, no, these technologies don't work for us, and we're not going to adopt them. And Urvashi, I can tell you this much, that it's not as if this is some kind of a moral rejection of technology from the farmers. It's not as if, they're like, oh no, we don't want technology has been bad. And the refusal on their part is really, they just don't see how they are benefiting through these technologies. So it's not as if they're refusing the technologies because, technologies are inherently bad. No, they want to benefit alongside these technologies. It's just that I think the history of the peasantry, the farmers in India, as Neth pointed out, like, we've had that history of green revolution. Farmers have seen that all of these new technologies were introduced at that time. It really did not do anything to, to their productivity or If anything, they now have to put in more money, more capital into buying, all kinds of agricultural inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, those kind of things. So now they're very cautious. They have been burnt once. So they know that, just because somebody from outside comes and says that, oh, please adopt these technologies, they're not going to do that. Having said that, I also want to say that this is when the startups and the private sectors try to sell their technologies to these people. That's the case then. That there we see farmers having a lot more agency. It's a completely different scenario when the government, the state tries to, tries for farmers to uptake some of these technologies. The push is very different in that sense that they would attach some kind of subsidies to farmers uptake of technology. Like land record digitization was a big issue in this part of the country, and so essentially what the state government has now started doing is that if you want subsidy, you will have to get your records digitized, or you would have to apply for these schemes online. So there's some more covert ways in which the adoption is kind of being pushed to the farmers. But one of the things which I'm seeing, which was very hopeful for me, was that there was an active refusal of these technologies on the ground. Um, Primarily because, I mean, one of the main things was that these technologies also come with their own work mechanisms. So one of the first things that, like, the startups or the incubators, or, like, the technologists, they do is they try to problematize everything. So they're like, oh, you have been doing this farming, like, in one, two, three, four ways. That is actually wrong. You now need to overhaul the entire, like, your entire business process, and you need to change it like this. And that is not okay with farmers, because the entire farming community, the mandis, which are the wholesale, agricultural markets, the global supply chains, even, like, there is a particular way in all of it works. And, all of these technologists are suddenly coming from outside and saying, you've been doing all of this wrong for such a long time. We are now here to tell you how to do it well. And essentially, their processes are a way to kind of standardize the entire process. And I actually wanted to begin by saying that the reason why I started doing PhD in this field in the first case was, and I started my PhD during the pandemic, and I was interested in agriculture, and I started looking at what's happening in digital agriculture. And one of the images that I came across, and I'm sure all of you have come across, is that of, like, a farmer sitting in his living room, and he has this glass window on the side, and he has an iPad on his hand. It's a he, of course. He has an iPad in his hand, and he's, like, operating the harvester, the combine, the drone, like, all of which are flying somewhere in his field. And I grew up in a village, like, I grew up in rural area, and I was like, this, like, how would this translate to, India, which is a country of, or South Asia, really, which is a region of smallholder farmers, where, the farm size is less than 2 acres. Like 85% of our farmers have less than 2 acres of land. Like, where are these harvesters and combines and automated tractors and drones? Like, how are they going to operate in these, how is digital agriculture going to roll out in this area? And that, I think, is one of the biggest issues. That's what my finding tells me, that that's one of the biggest issues which all of these companies are facing, including some of the big tech companies that are now taking a lot of interest in India, because we are just such an important region when it comes to food supply chains in the world. And yeah, the diversity of the smallholder farming, the inability to standardize the farmers, the inability to standardize these practices, it's kind of giving a big challenge to these technology startups and companies as well. But I think the future will tell us how that kind of unrolls.
That's fascinating, Anuba. Thanks. I mean, I think it's such an interesting perspective that you don't hear very often, right? Which is that farmers are actually rejecting this technology. And I think what I'm hearing from what you're saying also is that, one, we need to distinguish about who's providing the technology. Like in the case of the state, it seems to be bundled in with other types of kind of commitments and is almost coercive in some sense, and that's where the rejection is coming. And in the case of the private sector and startups, what we're seeing is very kind of siloed interventions that don't really have a kind of system perspective on what, how that particular practice links up into other parts of the entire kind of supply chain, and the life of a farmer. But what also strikes me about what you're saying is that, the farmers are not adopting these technologies. They don't want them. And in a place like Western Maharashtra, it's not for reasons of lack of finances or lack of connectivity. Those basic kind of building blocks are in place, at least for the communities that you work for. So the question that comes to me is that, why is there such a growing market for agri-tech then in the first place, right? Why are so many startups and big tech companies building these products where it seems like there isn't really an interested consumer at the other end?
I want to emphasize again that it's not as if the farmers are rejecting technology, because it's not a moral rejection of technology. They're basically saying that you are benefiting out of this. If you can create something that we can benefit out of as well, we would really want to adopt it. In fact, a lot of people did give it a try, and then, after 6 months, 7 months, when some of these tech wasn't working, they were like, we're not going to put in our money. Like, we need to take some of these things more seriously. And Urvashi, I think when we think about why technology, why there is so much push in, like, creating all of these technologies, is some of it also, at least in the case of India, we have to go back to 2016 when Digital India program was kind of first introduced. And, there are a lot of these peripheral things which are happening. Digital India kind of, was very successful in putting forth this narrative that digitization is the way forward. And it's not just agriculture that we are seeing digitization is. We are seeing digitization in all sectors, all public sectors of the country. But the other thing also is the startups keep working, because the amount of funding that is available to the startups by the government of India, I was surprised. I don't have the numbers with me right now, but essentially it is that if you can create a prototype, there is at least one government incubator which will give you 5 lakh rupees to develop that into something else. So there is so much funding available for these startups, especially in agriculture, that, even if they're not doing anything on the ground, even if they're just, I've seen a lot of startups just developing, like, 1 or 2 prototypes, and then, pitching their work to venture capitalists and, like, all of these funding organizations and government organizations as well, and just lasting for like 5 years, 6 years. And I've also seen a lot of startups pack up their shops, like, after 5 years, when they haven't been able to do anything. And that I feel like there is more research, there is more conversation that needs to happen about that, about where the money for all of this is coming from. And then, Urvashi, something else has happened in 1991 when liberalization happened in India. I think then Finance Minister Manmohan Singh decided that, we will liberalize other sectors, but Indian agriculture is something that, parts of it would be protected, because, like, livelihoods of so many people kind of depends on that sector. And ever since 1991, that has been an issue with the opposition, that, agriculture wasn't liberalized at that time. And we're actually seeing negative growth in agriculture, and all of that negative growth and all the issues with agriculture, they're kind of being linked to that 1991 moment when agriculture wasn't liberalized. And now digitization is a great way of, kind of bringing in capitalist development, quote unquote, to agriculture. And I think some of how technologies are being developed cannot be just seen in this silo of, technologies are being developed. There's all of this peripheral activities and history, which is kind of linked to the moment that we have now arrived to. So I'll say that, in fact, in, the economic survey of 2021-22, there was a very clear articulation that Indian agriculture needs, quote unquote, reorientation. And that reorientation is needed because of all the issues, all the problems with agriculture, low productivity, those kind of things, and, climate change. And that reorientation can happen through 1, 2, 3, 4th by digitalizing agriculture. So, you see that kind of being pushed in all areas. So
No, thanks. And I think it's always really helpful to kind of set this in context, right? That these conversations are not happening just here and now. There is a longer trajectory that we need to kind of be mindful of. Ned, the question to you. So, alongside this podcast, the Code Green podcast, we also have a newsletter. And I think one of the upcoming editions that my colleagues have been working on is on agriculture. And there is a really interesting illustration they have in there, which is that data is the new crop. What is the value of agricultural data? Is that part of the reason why there is so much investment in this area, despite some of the challenges that Anuba mentioned and that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think we should start by sort of unpacking, demystifying the data is the new crop, no? Like because when you say it's a new crop, it grows, it gets harvested. Of course, somebody planted it, and I think exposing the difference, where the difference starts, is something that will allow me to respond to your question better, more concretely. No, unlike in this case, like, who planted? No, where did the seed come from? So it's farmers, it's the farm, it's the environment that actually provide the data that constitute the big data later. And where is it used? No, that is a big question. Like those who the data were harvested, those whose farms the data came from, that are being used to feed algorithms, no, and establish this big data and all that, are not even told on how are this being used. Like in the Philippines, for example, and other parts of Southeast Asia, there are tons of apps that are being used and promoted by the government without any response, without even answer on who is responsible for storing the data. Where do you store the data? Like, it always makes me laugh, like discussing this issue with officials in the Philippines involved in digitalization, because you always get a different answer. Like, where do you store the data? Is there any agreement on data flows? It's ranging from yes to no, I don't know. No, and also saying that, oh, I think we have uh, an agreement with Google or with Amazon. It's like, I think so. Where do I get the answer? So nobody even knows, not even government, who's supposed to govern the data collected from farmers using apps that are being promoted by the government itself. No harvesting, no, because we're using the crop analogy. Who harvests the data? So that is a big question too. Like, is it the government who harvests the data? If it's the government that harvests the data, where do they use it? How do they use it? No, like advising farmers on how to spray pesticides on pests and diseases and all that. And the next question would be like, okay, if you are going to advise farmers on what to do, how to address pest and disease problems in their farm, then do you give them options not to spray? and and the answer is no, because the only the options that involve spraying of pesticides XYZ is involved, no biologicals and all that. So harvesting data is also a big issue of governance. Who harvests? What is it for? And of course, the end question is, who benefits from all the harvesting of the data? If we're using the crop analogy, it appears, no, like, and to me, it's very obvious. It's not those who provided the seed, provided the data, who actually harvest and benefit from that. Now, of course, they will claim that, oh, the benefit to farmers is that the app told them what to spray, when to spray, or when to harvest, etc. So, but these things, like, do you think farmers would rely on the app to be able to know what to do when there's pest and disease? Like, you've actually in the process even disable them no, by deskilling them, because they have now to rely on apps, no. Imagine Now, like if there is no transfer now of knowledge from farmer to farmer or from farmers to son or daughters and all this future generation, the idea is really to just rely on apps, on AI, not to be able to provide advice. So who benefits? So to me, I think we really have to unpack that. Like data is the new crop. And I think it's a good way not to be able to expose that. I think it's unfair to crops not to be able to be used as the analogy of how this works, no? Because everything from the seed to the benefits is antithetical to what crops mean in agriculture. Because in agriculture, in real agriculture that involves labor, that involves contribution of everyone in the communities and recognizing that contribution, like everyone knows where the data comes from, how is it used, how is it harvested, how, who benefited. But here we don't even know. So the challenges actually rest on that. There's even a lot of, like, it's not even about it's not even about lack of transparency, it's just lack of skills. Like governments who are supposed to govern, officials who are supposed to regulate, who are supposed to understand how this whole thing works, from the seed, the data, to benefits, don't even have the knowledge, cannot even provide you with basic answers, no, on how is it used, where is it stored, who benefits, who has access. I don't get actually a decent response from any of the government officials I've spoken to, from regional level to national level here in the Philippines, about this. Like in a recent policy forum where I was invited to by the Philippine Rice Research Institute, I asked the Undersecretary of Agriculture in a forum about access to data, about protection, privacy, storage, data flows. And his answer is, I don't know. He was even very honest to say, I am the one in charge for digitalization, but I wouldn't claim that I know everything about digitalization. So we are in, I think that situation itself that we are in is very challenging, because we demand access, we demand regulation, but who will regulate? That's why big tech, who designs all of this, small tech, whether that includes startups, are saying that why would you regulate us? You don't even know how this technology even works. So let us regulate ourselves. So I think that brings us the whole caboodle of challenges involved in data as a crop, no, data digitalization in agriculture. And if we think that we know the issues in digitalization with regards to privacy, violence, and what property rights, think again if you apply it in digitalization, because there's a lot of things there that don't actually home in regards to application of digitalization, such as in the internet, for example. Because a lot of the things that we're talking about in agriculture are not even private property. Like privacy does not even apply in that very strict sense if you're talking about the commons or resources that are owned by communities, or communities acting as custodians of these knowledge systems that are, or data information that are being digitalized. So it's far more complicated than that. So I think we really have to unpack this in order to understand fully the challenges that are before us in agricultural digitalization.
No, really helpful. And I think, the example that you gave of the meeting that you attended where a senior minister of government is saying, like, we just honestly don't know, kind of really sums up the challenge for me. Like, if we don't even know what is happening with the data, or where it's flowing, or where it's being used, we don't even really have a starting point to think about what we should be regulating, what we should be regulating for, where there's potential misuse. And then there's also such a kind of knowledge imbalance between the tech companies and governments and farmers as well, which in some sense is growing as we see technology get more and more sophisticated. So we've spoken a lot, I think, about some really, really kind of fundamental challenges and fundamental issues when we think about AI in agriculture. So I want to spend a little bit of time of trying to think about is how do we break out of this, right? So there is obviously, we have a very serious climate crisis on our hands in Asia. We see farmers are at the kind of front line of it. Their livelihoods are impacted by it. Their health is being impacted by it, and there's a whole other set of kind of cascading effects. Is and and we're talking about a problem that needs to be addressed at scale. It needs to be addressed fast, and so one is kind of inclined to think that technology can and should maybe play a role, at least in kind of helping do it at scale and do it fast. So, is there a way to think about this differently, right? And where I'm coming from also is that a lot of the AI for agriculture space, and even what we've been talking about, is really focused on products for the farmer, right? Could there be a different end user where it might be more beneficial if we try and build AI products or build in kind of more sophisticated technology? Could it help policymakers? Could it help decision makers? Could it help planners in kind of addressing the conundrums and the challenges of climate crisis and agriculture in the region?
Um, I'm very wary of those. Whenever somebody says, what is the alternative, and if we can build different technologies which would, help solve for the climate crisis, I'm very wary about, those sort of conversations and solutions. A, because, technologies have already kind of set a narrative that, by doing this, you would not only achieve productivity per acre, but also efficiency, and also, you would be able to track your carbon and, all of those things, and would lead to like a better world. So I think that kind of solutionization is already built into some of these technologies. And I think before answering this question of how AI can solve for, or if, it can approach climate crisis or environmental issues in a different way, I would kind of take a step back and ask, what is AI in agriculture? And that it kind of brings me back to what Neth was trying to say, that there is this app economy which is kind of taking over agriculture. And Urvashi, really, there are apps that are being marketed to farmers or being marketed to companies for building carbon credits, that if you just track the amount of inputs that you're put like all the inputs that you're putting up in your farming, or the waters that you're putting up, every time that you're switching on your motor, if you just track it on the app, we will be able to tell you how much environmental harm you were able to mitigate, or happen because of these actions, and then that would translate into some kind of carbon credit. So, I mean, it is very clear that the way that this entire carbon economy, or this entire, how we understand some of these solutions that would mitigate the climate crisis, they have already been debunked. They're not working. The problem with policy, as I see it right now, is, and again brings back to the very important issue that Neth raised, was that even the policymakers do not understand what is happening. To be honest, sometimes I don't understand. There were multiple times in the field when I was questioning myself, that maybe I am wrong, maybe I am looking at it too critically, and that maybe really, these technologies would be able to make a difference in this area. But really, I am very wary of, I very cautious when it comes to these things of how technology can solve for climate crisis. I think that's probably not the right place to ask these questions to the technology.
Net, so I want to ask you the same question that Anuba answered, right? Um, is there a different way to think about this? A lot of the products that we see right now are focused on farmers, they're apps for farmers. But is there a role that technology can play that doesn't fall into some of these traps? So, To give you an example, perhaps there's a role for technology to help policymakers think about where they should be giving certain subsidies, or where they should provide livelihood support programs, because they know that using technology, they now know that, okay, these particular areas, there is the depletion of national resources, etc. Like, is there, can we think about this in a slightly different or more imaginative, creative ways? We're not stuck in the same kind of rut of AI for farmers, AI for crop advisories. Is there something
Think
else that we could do?
earlier, like I would actually tackle the question in the same way Anuba did, like also expressed my discomfort about that framing, because it's largely saying that you already have the solution here, AI. There are actually already well documented reasons to say that this is not the technology that we should be pouring or our resources on. It's not about finding the correct users, or whether that's policymakers or think tanks and all that. We have to interrogate the technology itself. Because AI as a technology, even those proponents like Sam Altman, for example, already say that you need like what? Quantum leap in energy development to be able to meet the energy requirement of this technology. No, like what kind of issue are we talking about if there's a technology that requires so much energy in an era where the issue is about like saving the climate? And right now we don't have that kind of energy that will meet the requirements of AGI, that will free us from fossil. So they could, despite all the propaganda about going renewable, buying carbon credits left and right, like big tech is still very reliant on fossil fuel. Of course, Microsoft, Amazon are investing on carbon credits, carbon offsets. But in reality, it's them continue using and depending on fossil fuel. So I think like that the energy requirements of that technology has to be interrogated for us to determine, is this the kind of technology that we should be talking about right now? No, second, even water consumption of that technology. If you're talking of AI, and much worse for AGI, you're talking about data centers that would store all this data, that will process all this data real time, 24/7, and you need water 24/7 to be able to make sure that those data centers will continue to operate. And we already have well documented cases of how these data centers have been competing for water, municipality level in the US. Example of Taiwan in 2022, where the Taiwanese government sacrificed 82,000 hectares of agricultural lands just to be able to supply the water requirements of TSMCI, to be able to produce about 90% of the world's microchips needs, no, for consumer products. So yeah, so water for data chips, for microchips, for data centers, all of that, same water that we all need for agriculture to feed us all, same water that we need to drink, and same water that we need to provide for all the needs, health and otherwise. And of course, third, critical minerals. Like none of these data centers, none of these digital tools will ever run without the critical minerals that are extracted from the Congo, from Indonesia, from the Philippines, nickel, cobalt. None of them are actually picked from the clouds or fall from the sky when it rains. So all of them require extraction of minerals. And it may not be on earth, it may be undersea. And that's already a deep conversation, a serious conversation now, deep sea mining. And all of these startups that are boasting about asteroid mining is all about providing for critical minerals for the digitalization industry, whether that's renewable energy, batteries, digital tools, AI, and all these sophisticated, very specialized technologies needed to make AGI run. So my point is we have to interrogate the technology that is being offered. It's not that we will just say the technology is already there. Let's find for a market. Let's find for an application. So the technology itself has to be unpacked and interrogated, because the technology, the way it runs counter to the very aim that it purports to go for, no, like saving the climate. How can you save the climate when you require so much energy, when you require extraction of so much water and so much critical mineral? So to me, I think we have to unpack that. And it's not that we will create what situation and application for a technology that's already there. Like we even have to ask, like, whose technology is it? Is that what this world needs? So I will really unpack the question, Uvashi, to be able to answer it. I think we in the process, we will be able to help policymakers to make the right decisions if we unpack that question.
No, totally, totally, Neth. And I couldn't agree with you more. And in some sense, you're also preempting another episode that we have lined up on Code Green, which is on the environmental impacts of AI. So maybe we're nearly at the hour and we're over time. So maybe just a final closing question to both of you. If by some kind of magical way or unplanned way you were both made the manager of an AI fund, what would be, how would you want to spend it? What would be your priority areas on spending this AI fund? And Anupa, I'll start with you and then we'll close with Neth.
Yeah, I think I would be mostly answer from my field experience, and I would say if I had the money, I would ask all the startups, and like this is a problem that we see in technology design quite a bit, which is that so much of it is tied to just designing fast and like doing things fast and like failing fast. I would make it a criteria to like just go spend your time in the field, spend about a year. I will give you the money for it. Understand what people really need rather than like coming up with your preconceived notions about like this is the requirement. I think that would solve about 50% of the problems in this area, because like there is so many technologies are developed which farmers are like we really don't need it, like apps. And I've had these conversations with farmers. Every startup would create an app. That is because in smallholder economy, you cannot make a harvester, you cannot make a machine, you cannot make a combine for like a 2 acre farm. So the easiest thing to sell to the farmers is an app, and farmers are like, we have 46 of these of these apps in our phones. So I think one of the things which I would do is I would urge all of these companies to spend time in the field, understand the situation, because Urvashi, technology inherently is not good or bad. I mean, that's an argument. We know that technology, like it's how people use it, how people design it. That's what brings the politics to it. The second thing that I would do is as a fund, like somebody who's managing the fund or whatever, and even to policymakers, I think I would give the suggestion is have inbuilt accountability mechanisms. If you did this, if this much money was given to you, if you made this prototype, if you tested it out, like what is it that happened after that? Because I think one of the biggest harms these technologies do, and these in incubators as well, where I did my field work, a lot of these startups were taught, oh, fail fast, design a prototype, like test it out in the field, fail fast. I think that ends up doing a lot of harms in real life situation and real world situations, like agriculture. Like farmers end up losing their income for like the whole season, and then it accrues this entire cycle of debt and all of those things. Who is accountable for these things? And I think this is something that we don't have in our policy when it comes to technologies or AI, quote unquote AI, in any of these sectors, which is we don't have proper accountability mechanisms. I understand that we don't understand how technologies work, but that doesn't stop us from asking these startups to be answerable. So I think those are primarily the two things off the top of my head right now that I would recommend. Yeah.
That's super helpful. I hope you become the manager of an AI fund. Net, same question to you. You're the manager of an AI fund. How do you want to spend the money?
I think what I will do is to give all the money that I'm supposed to manage to Anuba, because that's exactly how I want to use the money that I'm being asked to manage. So Anuba, you have mine as well. So use it there. You can also add societal evaluation of artificial intelligence, like developing methodologies of like how do you evaluate these new and emerging technologies, including AI, like in the process, educating people, communities on how these technologies run, how are they developed, what are they for, that is, there's nothing mysterious about how they operate, and also what are the implications, environmental, societal, etc., and let communities decide, is this the kind of technology that you need not to solve your problems? So it's largely what Anuba says. So I think I will not, since I don't want to be an AI fund manager, I think I'll just give up the funds that I'm supposed to manage to Anuba and let her handle it. Just add societal evaluation of AI, Anuba, in your portfolio.
So that sounds like a great idea. Well, thank you both so much. I really enjoyed talking to both of you. I think we covered a lot of ground, and there was certainly lots of food for thought for me. I think you both kind of really came at this conversation from first principles, and also really try to put back in the conversation what farmers really need, while also kind of talking about the broader kind of structural context in which AI and agriculture solutions are being developed. And hopefully, Anuba will be the head of an AI fund soon, and many of these problems will be solved. But thank you both very much for being on this show.
Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode. We'll be back next month with more conversations at the intersection of climate change and artificial intelligence in Asia. Don't forget to subscribe and do sign up for our monthly newsletter at codegreen.asia. I'm Urvashi Aneja, and on behalf of Digital Futures Lab, thank you for listening.